Welcome, everyone. Hope you all had a great day. God's blessed us with a beautiful night and a beautiful weekend, it looks like. And so we're really excited to start our God and Science seminar tonight with Dr. Michael Houts. And we are so glad to have him with us. I've never heard Mike preach or teach before, but everybody who has really recommended him as an excellent speaker and really knows what he's talking about. And I know that we're going to be blessed by having Mike with us here tonight. He was a former evolutionist who became a Christian, and we are so glad that he is a part of the family of God since about 1999. Okay. And so he's been working for the Lord for many years. He's been associated with Apologetics Press and still writes articles and does a lot of things with them. I know that he's a graduate from MIT. He's been working with NASA for many years, doing nothing less than working on a trip to Mars. So he's been staying really busy and really someone who I think is going to bring some things to us tonight that maybe we haven't heard, because he's going to give us the scientific perspective on this that a lot of us aren't so aware of. And I think it's especially good for us to confirm our faith and to see how true science truly does support the Bible, because it is truth. And we want to share this with our young people and those of all ages especially. So if you know some others who need to be here, you don't see here tonight, try to reach out to them and get them to come back and be with us as well. But we're really excited to have you all here. We have a lot of visitors. We love our visitors, and we hope that you'd register with us. You can use the QR code here on the screen, or you can use a visitor's card in the pew racks there and leave it on the welcome desk as you go out tonight. But we just want to welcome you all. We're here to praise the Lord. We're here to worship Him as we study His Word together and see these evidences of Christianity tonight together. So we want to begin with an opening prayer tonight, and I've asked Curtis Taft to come up and lead that. Oh, it's not you. Okay, I'll hold for you later. Dave Lyon, one of our very popular teachers here and members of the church here at Northwest, will lead us in our opening prayer, and then we'll turn it over to you, Mike. Okay.
Let us pray. Our most gracious and loving Heavenly Father, we are so grateful for this opportunity we have to gather together as fellow Christians of like mind to learn more about your word, to have a guest speaker here, to be able to present your word to us in a different manner, in a different light, in a different way that we can grow in knowledge of your word and grow in understanding. So grateful, Lord, that we have this freedom to worship you and to study your word and to become more attuned to your knowledge, Lord, to gain understanding. Pray, Lord, that you be with us tonight and forgive us of our sins. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Well, good evening. I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I'd like to thank Robert for organizing this, and thank Chris and Paula for just their incredible hospitality. Brave Dallas traffic to pick me up at the airport, fed me an incredibly good dinner. Just all kinds of thanks to everyone here. But I'm going to start out just pointing out, the weekend's going to go really fast. So if you have a question that you really want to discuss, or just anything that you think might be just on your mind, please catch me during a break. Catch me after the session tonight, tomorrow, Sunday, because it's always Friday night. It's always, oh great, we got the whole weekend, and then all of a sudden Sunday's here. And one of the goals is really want to make sure no one leaves here without at least talking or raising a question. It's not saying we can look for resources. Obviously, look to the Bible first, but just make sure don't have a burning question or something that's kind of bothering you. Please don't leave this weekend before we get at least a chance to talk about that. Also, though, if you do think of something Monday or Sunday night late, please feel free to send me an email anytime. I've got my email address up there. It's just the house315@gmail.com. And then also really good material available on the Apologetics Press website. The books on the table, they're going to be here in the library. So if you just kind of look through, Mainly just like to put them out on the table first so people know what will be in the library. If we just get up here and say, hey, there's like 20 really good books that'll be in the library, then no one really knows what exactly they will be. But those are the books that are on the table. And of course, if you'd like to order a personal copy, most of them are available on the the Apologetics Press website. But again, if there's some that aren't, then again, just let me know and I can try to point you in the right direction for that. So topics we're going to talk about, we'll start out with, and this was as advertised, why true science is a Christian's friend. Talk about the origin and evolution of life, and we'll try to get through those two pretty much tonight. And then tomorrow morning we'll do the origin of the universe, the age of the earth, and then and kind of interwoven through the whole series will be the last three: we are without excuse, the most important decision we ever make, and societal implications of atheistic evolution. And probably the Sunday morning Bible class will focus a lot on the societal implications of atheistic evolution, because that's really important. Also, it's fun to talk the technical details and really get into the science, but it's also important to say why does this matter? Well, we know it matters spiritually where people put their faith, but it actually also has a really negative impact on our physical lives here on earth, and so we'll be talking about that probably Sunday morning. It's God and science, so kind of need to define what we're talking about. And so we talk about science. This is generally accepted definition. Took this out of Google's English dictionary. It was provided by Oxford Languages, but it says the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against the evidence obtained. Okay, so that's the definition of science, and we'll be referring back to that throughout the study. And then the other one is when we talk about scientific theories. So this was a good definition. Well, how can you say if something's a scientific theory or just something that someone might believe or someone might be thinking or just an idea? How do you distinguish between those? And so one of the tests that's proposed is called the falsification principle. It says the falsification principle proposed by Karl Popper is a way of demarcating science from non-science. It suggests that for a theory to be considered scientific, it must be able to be tested and conceivably proven false. For example, the hypothesis that all swans are white can be falsified by observing a black swan. And so this is particularly important for a lot of things that are floated today as science. We'll talk about the Big Bang probably be tomorrow morning, but that's one where if you really start looking into it, we have so many adjustable parameters now on the Big Bang theory that it actually doesn't matter what our observations are. We can tweak those parameters to claim that they still support the theory. And so we'll give a lot of examples of that. But that's one of the reasons when people say the Big Bang's not a scientific theory, you try not to, you think, oh, they're just slamming the Big Bang because they disagree with it. But it's like, no, actually the way it's formulated, it's not a scientific theory because it can't be falsified. In other words, it doesn't matter what observation we make, we can adjust a parameter here or there and pretend it still supports the theory. But we'll get into more detail on that tomorrow. I just want to throw that out now, so this isn't just an abstract exercise. It's when we're looking at something, okay, first of all, just based on the, again, the definition of science, what is the science supporting? I mean, the true operational science, what direction is that leading us? And then if someone proposes a theory, well, is that a scientific theory or not? Theory of gravity, that's very scientific. Because I can sit here doing experiments. I can sit here dropping this remote, and I drop it a million times, it always falls down. If just once it flies up to the ceiling, I better have a good explanation for it. Otherwise, my theory that gravity always pulls things towards the center of the earth has just been falsified. And so that's, again, it's important as we move through. I want to, of course, start out with Scripture. Really got to keep the goal in mind, because at least I know for a lot of, if you're here on a Friday night, a lot of these discussions can be really fun. But we got to keep the ultimate goal in mind. It's not to win an argument. It's literally just to encourage a person to objectively consider the Bible and then make a decision. They either decide to, essentially, their decision will be, do they decide to spend eternity with God, or they decide they want to spend eternity separated from God. And that's really what the Bible lays out, and it's called by different names. But that's really really important decision. Give some examples too. A lot of people become convinced that evolution's wrong, it's not scientific. but they don't become Christians. So if we went out there and we convinced them that the universe had to be created, but they never obey the gospel, we really didn't do them any good, frankly. So again, it's not to win an argument. It's really to get people to obey the gospel, encourage them to consider the Bible, and then encourage them to obey the gospel so that they can spend eternity with God. And so Ephesians 4:14 through 15, as a result, we are no longer to be children, tossed here and there by waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by craftiness and deceitful scheming. But speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects into him who's the head, even Christ. We have, told to love our neighbors as ourselves. Mark 12:29 through 31. Jesus answered, the foremost is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. And so, when we talk about this, when we think about loving our neighbor, again, it's we really just need to be thinking about their eternity. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that we can show physical, if someone's hungry, we want to feed them, and that's really important. If they need clothing, we want to provide clothes. It's very biblical, very important. But ultimately, we need to go beyond that. We also need to, if we're truly loving our neighbor as ourselves, we need to be thinking about their spiritual condition, helping them in that aspect as well. Another way to think about it is, we need to be focused on their eternity, just like we need to focus on our eternity. Matthew 16:26, for what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? And so when we talk about eternity, I put that little quote on the bottom, or just that sentence on the bottom. I think probably these days, a lot of us have at least known of someone that lived to be 100 years old. But it's still kind of impressive. You think, wow, that person lived to be 100 years. If you're glancing at obituaries and you say, oh, that person, 100 years, that's a long time. It is a really long physical life. But if we think of eternity as an infinite number of years, and of course eternity is completely outside of time, but if we just think of that as an infinite number of years, well then, by definition, 100 years, or Methuselah, 969 years, that's zero compared to eternity. And so it's fantastic, it's biblical, help people with their physical needs, but we really need to be focused on people's spiritual needs when we're having these kinds of discussions. And then the other one is we need to expect to be persecuted. And, that's one thing that's great about reading the book of Acts. I mean, many things great about reading anywhere in the Bible, but, sometimes we feel like we're being persecuted today. Well, it's nothing compared to what the first century church was going through. But we need to expect that if we're out speaking the truth. But 1 Peter 3:13 through 15, and who is he who will harm you if you become followers of what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you are blessed. Do not be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled. But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear. So again, expect to be persecuted. I like that last one though too. Is if you're being persecuted and say this topic or any topic related to the Bible, and you just respond in a very loving Christian fashion, that's what's going to have the impact. The person that you're talking to, they're probably not going to remember what they were trying to argue with you about, or I guess you'd say persecute you about. They're just going to remember, wow, that was different. I was doing everything I could to irritate this person, and they just kept responding in a very loving Christian manner. And it's called meekness and fear in this particular verse. So what we'll then talk about, and just to give a summary, where we're going on this. So basically, the idea that the universe and everything in it simply made itself, it's strongly refuted by true science. So just get that up front. We'll be hitting that kind of point by point. True science is the Christian's friend and the enemy of the atheist. In other words, as science has been advancing, it's catching up with the Bible, and it's really starting to make it hard for someone to be an atheist. And again, we'll elaborate on that a lot. God has given us tremendous evidence that we should put our faith in him, but he also lets it be our choice. So Romans 1:20, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. And so that brings us to our first slide. And this doesn't look like a very technical slide. I was talking to Curtis on the way over, and he mentioned in the winter, you have a little bonfire, maybe even cook some over, just open fire out in the wood. And that's a lot of fun. It's really relaxing. It's kind of a way to just, I guess, really get relaxed, for lack of a better phraseology. But I don't want you to focus so much on the family that's enjoying the fire, but focus on the fire itself. Okay, so the reason to focus on the fire is a piece of wood burning in a fire is actually a very complicated chemical reaction. In fact, we can take our best laboratory equipment, so you're measuring the density of the wood, the composition of the wood, the texture of the wood. Take our best laboratory, take our best computational fluid dynamics programs, or combustion programs. They can take into account things like air velocity, air temperature, things like that going on. We cannot predict how a piece of wood is going to burn when we put it on a fire. Okay, so we just think it's this really relaxing, but it's actually a really complicated chemical reaction. And so if you're out watching a campfire, say you're out watching one this past winter, and it's, again, just real pretty, and sometimes you get little blue flames here, and red over here, and if the person next to you said, "I'm so glad the wood chose to burn that way," okay, what are you going to do? Okay, well, good ideas would be get a blanket on them, get them inside, warm them up, maybe, because, that'd be kind of crazy. I mean, a piece of wood does not choose where it's going to burn. It's a really complicated chemical reaction, but it can't make a choice because all it is a really complicated chemical reaction. Okay, if God had not given us a soul, we would be the same way. We would just be this incredibly complicated chemical reaction. But, chemical reactions, when it comes down to it, it's just the concentration of the different atoms, the pH, the temperature, very deterministic factors. Chemical reaction cannot make even a simple choice. And so it's kind of, I guess you'd say, point one is it kind of establishes, because we know we can make choices. I just chose to do this. You chose to come here tonight. You chose where to sit. And so it's kind of a common sense type of argument, but it in of itself refutes atheism. And you can talk to atheists about this. I've given talks at colleges, and had the president of the atheist club. Sometimes they'll call themselves free thinkers. I mean, they have all these different names for themselves. But I've had them come up to me afterwards, and we'll be talking. And one case, it was probably 5 minutes into talking, and I will admit, when you say atheist, it's not. These aren't people to be worried about. They'll talk with you. They might start up a little gruff because they think you're going to be, but just talk to them. So we're just talking, but finally about 5 minutes in, I just said, "Well, did you have a choice to be here tonight?" And he said, "Yeah, I could have done 1,000 other things. I chose to be here." Well, I was trying to be really polite. He thought I was going to say, "Well, hey, if you're going to disagree with me, why'd you show up?" Well, I don't want to be, that wasn't at all where I was going with it. I just said, did he have a choice? And so walked him through this, and he agreed. Now, he wasn't baptized that night. It's not like the real, but at least it got him thinking that, hey, because he knew he could make choices. And so he at least got him thinking, I guess would be what you would say. And so, but again, that's kind of point one. Just the fact that we can choose tells us how we should choose. And big enough crowd, I'll probably just keep going. But if some of this, you want to talk about it more, please, catch me after the sessions and stuff, because this is a really important point. Because you can, if you're inviting someone to a Bible study and they say no, or this, well, you might have an opportunity to use this. You might say, well, was that your choice to say no? Was it your choice to say yes? If they say, yeah, I'll study the Bible with you, you say, well, I'm so glad you made that choice. And that's the first reason, we know we should study the Bible is because you could choose to study with me. That means you have a soul. Use it as a good, I say, conversation starter or evangelism tool. Now, I won't read all these necessarily verbatim, but the atheists know this, and it's a huge problem. And so literally, if you go to, unfortunately, a lot of the philosophy departments in the United States in public schools, they've been taken over by atheists. And so almost the first thing, you talk to a student that goes off to college, if they take a philosophy class, if they go major in philosophy, one of the first things they're going to get hit with is, hey, you don't have any free will, okay? And you're like, why on earth would a philosophy class be trying to convince them they didn't have free will? Well, this is why. Because they realize once that person thinks about it, if they think they have free will, then they know atheism's wrong. And so if someone is trying to convince them of that, that's the direction they're going to go. And so, again, if you're a young person, you're going off to college, just have your antenna up. If you hear someone start trying to go down this path of, you really didn't get a choice of what you ate for breakfast this morning or where you sat, just that's probably the direction they're trying to head. So they actually have workshops on this. This was one in the Berkshires, had many leading atheists there, and a lot of quotes there. But this was from Francis Crick. Okay, so now this is another important point. Francis Crick, he won a Nobel Prize for helping determine the structure of the DNA molecule. Okay, so incredible scientific credentials. Okay, I'm going to read this statement he made, and based on what we talked about, what's science and what's just belief, is this statement scientific or is it just a religious belief? Okay, so this is from Francis Crick. Again, no one's going to question his scientific credentials. Guy wins a Nobel Prize, tremendous scientist, because your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. Who you are is nothing but a pack of neurons. Okay, it's a science statement or a religious statement? And it's 100% religious, right? But you see the other twist here. People are just going to be thinking, hey, this guy won a Nobel Prize. Well, he won a Nobel Prize for science. This just happens to be his religion. And so one way to maybe phrase it is when you're talking to someone, if you have an atheist with scientific credentials speaking as a scientist, well, he's going to be just as right or wrong as anybody else. There's plenty of excellent scientists, people that can do their science, and they unfortunately, they're atheists. Unfortunately, because again, for their eternity, they can do the best science they want, but it's not going to matter. So if there's an atheist with scientific credentials speaking as a scientist, well, they'll be just like any other scientist in general. On average, I guess you'd say. But what you run into, what you see, the quotes in the press and the ones that make the headlines, they are atheists with scientific credentials speaking as atheists. And so in this case, you have an atheist, impeccable scientific credentials, but he's just speaking as an atheist. He's just promoting his atheism. Okay, so that's another important point when people say, oh, scientists say this. No. We'll get into scientists will not argue with because, I've been blessed to be able to have lots of good discussions at work. There's also some really excellent books back there that are basically they're extensively referenced. One of the guys was the co-inventor of the gene gun, which was the first, basically the first device we used for genetic engineering. Two other PhDs are talking about, okay, what would it really take for a bacteria to somehow make itself? So very highly technical scientists. So people don't argue with that kind of science, but you will have atheists with scientific credentials that will try to go against that. So it goes on, says this is the naturalism that the workshoppers in the Berkshires were trying to move forward. Naturalism is also called materialism, the view that only matter exists, or reductionism, the view that all life, from tables to daydreams, is ultimately reducible to pure physics, or determinism, the view that every phenomenon, including our own actions, is determined by a pre-existing cause, which was itself determined by another cause, and so on, back to the Big Bang. Okay, so this is kind of interesting. So they were literally saying if you'd had a big enough computer at the point of the Big Bang, this is the determinism view, well, it could have said that, hey, and the Big Bang's wrong, but if it was right, the determinism would say that, oh, it would know exactly what you're wearing tonight, where you're going to be sitting, where you're going to, and so again, you start seeing the, kind of what they were, I guess you'd say, struggling with or trying to figure out how to deal with. Now, this is a really interesting quote for several reasons. It says, Daniel Dennett took a different view. While it is true that materialism tells us a human being is nothing more than a moist robot, a phrase Dennett took from a Dilbert comic. Okay, so they're basically just saying, again, no free will. We run a risk when we let this cat or robot out of the bag if we repeatedly tell folks that their sense of free will or belief in objective morality is essentially an illusion. Such knowledge has the potential to undermine civilization itself, Dennett believes. Okay, but you start thinking about the irony here, because if Dennett's right, he doesn't have free will either. He can't be thinking. Any thought he has is just a result of his chemical reactions. If he was right, you could change the thermostat in the room and he would be thinking differently. So it's just kind of ironic. It's like they're up here And so they can see this, but we're all down here. We're just the moist robots, And so they don't want to let us know that we're just moist robots. So it's kind of interesting, to have that kind of approach, I guess. It says, civil order requires the general acceptance of personal responsibility, which is closely linked to the notion of free will. Better, said Dennett, if the public were told, again, the little people, were told that for general purposes, the self and free will and objective morality do indeed exist, that colors and sounds exist too, just not in the way they think. They exist in a special way, which is to say, ultimately, not at all. Okay, so it's just, just some really eloquent comments, but just kind of think through, okay, what exactly are they trying to say here? And so where you'll typically run into it, you won't pull up these detailed quotes, but if you go out on some of the atheistic sites, they know people aren't going to agree that they can't make choices. And when I say free will, these aren't big decisions. These are literally just anything. What shoe do you put on first? Do you turn the TV on? Do you not turn it? Just trivial decisions. You can't even do that if atheism is correct. And so and so you go on their websites, a lot of times they say, oh, no, you have free will. It's deterministic free will. Okay, so a lot of people, they're going to be satisfied at that. They'll say, okay, deterministic free will. Okay, no, the atheists say we have free will. But then you dig a little deeper, what deterministic free will is basically saying is your chemical reaction is so complicated, it makes you think you have free will. Okay, so in other words, you don't have free will. It's just your chemical reaction is so, it even makes you think you're making choices. So it's really, really strange. It'd be like saying, well, the wood actually has, free will, or never mind. The wood thinks it has free will. It's just kind of interesting. Okay, so that's probably what we'll probably change topics. And so what we'll talk about next is the origin and evolution of life. Okay, and so the first one says, okay, someone says, well, they put their, I've had people say, well, they put their faith in science. You're trying to get them to encourage to study the Bible, and very polite. Again, these aren't hostile conversations. Well, no, I chose to put my faith in science. Well, you notice that Jesus, when people would be talking with him, a lot of times he would answer with questions. I want to say it was like, some people say it was maybe 300 times where Jesus answers with a question, and only like 3 times where he actually, so it's a great way to have a non-confrontational discussion with someone. Because again, the goal isn't to get the person mad so they storm out of your office. The goal is, again, to get them to objectively consider the Bible. So this is a question I've asked, and it's basically goes, is it scientific to believe that something happens spontaneously, life arising from non-life, that we have been unable to duplicate given our best laboratories, our smartest scientists, and virtually unlimited financial resources? Okay, so, and you think about that, okay, yeah, we've hundreds of billions of dollars into biotechnology, really smart people working in that field, incredibly sophisticated laboratories. We can't make life, so is it scientific to teach as fact that it just made itself? And I've never once had a person say it's scientific. I have had people say, well, they'll pause, and then they'll say, well, it's not scientific, but it's still what I believe. Okay, and so you think, okay, that was a dead end. What do we do next? But it's not a dead end at all, because what's happened is had the person acknowledge or admit that their belief wasn't scientific. Their belief was just a belief. It wasn't, and it actually goes against everything we know about true science, and that's what we'll talk about for the next several slides. And so it's again, just a question to ask. But again, no scientist is going to say that's scientific, and because it's not. Just think of that. It'd be like, we can make. I flew in on I can't remember what kind of plane it was, but it's like it was a really nice jet airplane that I flew in on today. So God has given us the creativity and the intelligence to make incredibly complicated things. This laptop's really complicated. Jet airplanes are complicated. Spaceships are complicated. We can't make life. And so we can't even make life. We can make a jet airplane. So if someone said, if you went to the gate agent at the airport and you said, or ticket agent, and you said, I can't believe you're charging me this much for this ticket. We all know these planes just make themselves. Again, that's another one of those ones where you get escorted out of the airport. And so it's and so that's the whole point is it would be more credible to say a jet airplane could make itself than to say life could make itself. Because again, we can make jet airplanes. God's given us that creativity and intelligence. We cannot make life. But we'll go into a little more detail. I'm going to talk about What we'll do, I guess, is we'll go through, kind of the history here to start with, and then we'll get into some additional detail. But again, I said early on, ignorance is the friend of the atheist, or science is the enemy of the atheist. And so maybe another way to think about that is, as an idea is put forward, in other words, if say someone says, hey, this shows atheism, or this proves atheism, if that idea is put forward, it can be put forward in a certain time or a certain context, but as science advances, as we learn more about science, it gets refuted. And so I'm going to go back. This is to a book published in 1876. It was Ernst Haeckel. He called his book The History of Creation. And so he's obviously trying to come up with here's what really happened. Don't believe Genesis. Here's what really happened. And so one of the things he knew immediately, he had to address, where did life come from? Because you can. We'll talk a little bit later about mutations in natural selection, how that doesn't drive evolution. But even to get to the point where you'd have mutations in natural selection, well, where'd you get that first life? So he tried to come up with this very simple life. And so I'll read a couple quotes. He says, during late years, we've become acquainted with Monera organisms, which are in fact not composed of any organs at all, but consist entirely of shapeless, simple, homogeneous matter. The entire body of one of these Monera during life is nothing more than a shapeless, mobile little lump of mucus or slime, consisting of an albuminous combination of carbon. Simpler or more imperfect organisms we cannot possibly conceive. So again, he's trying to say, it's so simple. He's trying to lead you down this path that, well, maybe it could make itself. And again, you notice how eloquent these people could write. This is long before ChatGPT. He said, during late years we have become acquainted with. That's good writing. You got to give him credit for that. Completely wrong, but it's good writing. Goes on, says the first complete observations on the natural history of Monera, protogenus primordialis, were made by me at Nice in 1864. Other very remarkable Monera I examined later, 1866 in Lanzarote, one of the Canary Islands, and in 1867 in the Straits of Gibraltar. The complete history of one of these Monera, the orange and red Protomixa orientiaca, is represented in Plate 1, and its explanation given in the appendix. I found some curious Monera also in the North Sea off the Norwegian coast near Bergen. Okay, so again, had a color plate. Well, color plate was actually a huge deal in a book published in 1876. And you can still get copies of this book out on Amazon, I think. So I got a copy to see. Sure enough, it's a very well done book. Says, perhaps the most remarkable of all Monera was discovered by Huxley, the celebrated English zoologist, called Bathybius haeckeli, Bathybius meaning living in the deep. This wonderful organism was living in immense, sorry, I got it. So, indeed, in some parts, 24,000 feet below the surface, and which have become known to us within the last 10 years through the laborious investigations made by the English. Okay, so again, really laying this out, but we are sure about this. I have examined them. We've examined them in many places. Other people have found them. Well, we actually knew, or he knew, before the book was published. This was a year before they were published. There was no such thing as Monera. Okay, so this is really important. So 1875, people were figuring out that Monera were just lifeless, inorganic compounds, and it was nothing more than amorphous gypsum precipitated out of seawater by alcohol. And so, clearly refuted. There were no real Monera, but it was published for about 50 years. And so that's one of the things we'll also run into is once something's out, in textbooks in the literature, and they'll just say, "Oh, it'd be too expensive to redo the book," again, just kind of excuses. It's actually really hard to pull something off the internet, apparently. And so there's a lot of things. We'll talk about that when we talk about the idea that maybe apes-like creatures turned into humans. A lot of things published in, say, 2005, 2010. I actually really think the person making the videos thought they were correct, and then in about 2018, most of those were refuted. But if you just go on the internet, you're going to pull up the videos that were made before the additional data came in, to show that those particular ideas were incorrect. So, again, we just start looking at things like deoxyribonucleic acid. Think about it. DNA is an extremely complex molecule that God designed to code for all the physical characteristics of all life. DNA consists of building blocks called nucleotides. So the idea is, could building blocks randomly assemble themselves into something useful? And the answer is no, but there was a debate, and you might run into this debate. This was back in 1860. Thomas Huxley proposed that 6 monkeys, 6 typewriters, and unlimited time, the the monkeys would eventually type all the books of the British Library. Okay, so this was the debate. So you say, okay, well that's, we'll talk a lot about the mathematical properties of infinity, especially when we're talking about the theories for the origin of the universe, Big Bang, things like that. But you're trying to invoke some really strange mathematical properties of infinity. But let's take it back to what people would consider like a real example. And so say you've got these six, and the idea is just the monkeys are just randomly typing letters, randomly typing things. And say you had a really simple typewriter, it had 26 letters on the keyboard, and the monkeys are just in there and they're just randomly hitting keys. Well, what would be the odds of them starting out with a W? Okay, well, it would be 1 in 26, right? You had 26 keys, they're just randomly hitting keys. So you have 1 in 26 hit a W. Now, to hit a W followed by an E, that's 1 in 26 times 1 in 26, so that ends up being 1 in 676. To hit a W followed by an E, followed by an A, followed by an R, followed by an E, well, now it's 1 in 26 times 1 in 26 times 1 in 26 times 1 in 26 times 1 in 26. So you're up to you're one chance in 11,881,376. We are a bunch of monkeys. Now you're 1 in about 2 followed by 28 zeros. Okay, so that's getting kind of unlikely. We are a bunch of monkeys. We are a bunch of monkeys trying to type something that makes sense. It's not working yet, but maybe given infinite time. Well, now you're down to basically 1 in 7 followed by 135 zeros. So the monkeys aren't even going to type that string. And I got a really good quote from Carl Sagan coming up. Again, the atheists acknowledge this. The evolutionists acknowledge this. And so, again, just to note, 20 billion years, it's 6.3 times 10 to the 23rd millionths of a second. I picked 20 billion years because someone just came out saying maybe the universe has to be 27 billion years old. But 20 billion years is typically the oldest that anyone will ever claim the universe might be. That's only 6 times 10 to the 23rd millionths of a second. That's tiny compared to this 7 times 10 to the 135th. And the number of atoms in the universe, most people agree it's less than 10 to the 80th. So again, just it's if you have someone say, well, no one really knows how long 20 billion years is. Well, we do. You can break it down in a microsecond. How you want to break it down? It doesn't matter. Evolution doesn't work. Life doesn't make itself. It doesn't matter how old the universe is. So it's not when we talk about the age of the Earth and the universe tomorrow, it really just comes back to the inerrancy of Scripture, the inerrancy of the Bible. But it doesn't matter how old the universe is. Life doesn't make itself, and things don't evolve. And so we're going to be talking about that a lot more. And then just to give you an idea what that looks like written out, that's what 1 chance in 6.89 times 10 to the 1/3, that's how many zeros you'd have. Okay, now you can say, okay, well, what about some of these publicized experiments and stuff? Well, you had the Miller-Urey experiment. Now, that one's kind of fallen out of favor. I went back to look at my old college biology textbook. Boy, Miller-Urey experiment, that was the big thing. Time I got to my daughter's biology textbook, they were saying, well, it maybe didn't show too much, and now I think it's getting kind of removed because people started pointing out all these flaws. And so what the Miller-Urey experiment did, it was basically a mixture that when they sparked it, you could create certain amino acids. And so they'd say, oh, we found amino acids. And so, but there was so much that they weren't telling you about those experiments. So one is, you need, say 100 amino acids to make a protein. So they weren't mentioning that in water breaks strings of amino acid apart. It doesn't cause them to come together. So if you had that warm little pond, that's not going to work. You're not going to get amino acids stringing together in a warm little pond. They're actually going to be broken apart. So even just that, you're 1 in 1 followed by 140 zeros of having 70 amino acids bonded. The building blocks, they have to be what they call one-handed. These are amino acids. I'm going to have that in a couple of slides. You might have heard that the OSIRIS-REx, the sample return mission we just got back, it found 14 out of 20 amino acids on this particular sample that they brought back, but they were racemic. They were an even mix of left and right-handed amino acids. So it actually proved even further that life can't make itself because it'd be totally useless as far as making life. And the amino acids themselves, of course, you could just predict from pretty much basic organic chemistry that you would find those types of amino acids. But so when you talk about left hand, right hand, you got your left hand, your right hand. You put your hands together like this, but you can't put them together like that. So that's what the amino acid, again, have to all be left-handed in life. And then also that particular experiment, the amino acids were only like 2% of the product. The other was 85% was tar, 13% carboxylic acid. So again, completely not suited for making life. And go on in this, again, a little bit more. This was out of just some reports. And that's great. These were just like a couple, 3 weeks ago. So this is really recent. They started analyzing the samples of return. It says the team found equal parts left-handedness and right-handedness in their OSIRIS-REx samples, referred to as racemic mixture. And then this is a quote again. This is a scientist speaking as a scientist. I have no idea if he's a Christian or not a Christian, but he was on the team. And he says, I have to admit I was a little disillusioned or disappointed, Glavin said. I felt like this had invalidated 20 years of research in our lab and my career. But I mean, here's the thing. This is exactly why we explore. This is why we do these missions, right? If we knew everything in advance, we wouldn't need to do an OSIRIS-REx to bring these samples back. And so what he was saying is, for whatever reason, he was thinking, well, maybe they'll all somehow be left-handed amino acids. And it was a racemic mix. It was 50-50. And so, but again, you look at how he responded. So that's whatever his religious belief, be atheist, Christian, that's a good scientific response to it. It's kind of like, well, it wasn't what I was expecting or what I was hoping for, but hey, that's why we do science. And so again, I actually really like that particular quote. Now, there's also, when they talk about maybe life making itself, they had certain atmospheres they had to propose existed on Earth. Ongoing controversy whether that atmosphere could have existed. We sent a probe into Jupiter. Now, this is old. This is back like 1996. Again, some people were saying, hey, we might even find life in the Jovian atmosphere. Found nothing. Very simple. They were, I guess, by technically, you'd say it's a complex molecule because it had two or more atoms, and it was organic because it had carbon in it. But again, just really simple molecules is all we found. And there's also some people come out with computer programs seeking a predetermined result, but again, that has nothing to do with the origin of life from non-life. And so here's some quotes. And so these are, again, I guess you'd say, famous people that themselves called themselves atheists. This is Sir Frederick Hoyle. And he said the likelihood of the formation of life from inanimate matter is 1 to a number with 40,000 noughts after it. It is enough to bury Darwin and the whole theory of evolution. There is no primeval soup, neither on this planet nor on any other. If the beginnings of life were not random, they must therefore have been the product of purposeful intelligence. Okay, so again, if you're out door knocking and someone says that to you, you're going to be like, wow, this is great. We'll do a Bible study. Maybe they'll be, baptized tonight or soon. Get the, have the preacher come over. Because you're thinking what he just said. If the beginnings of life were not random, they must therefore have been the product of purposeful intelligence. And so, but unfortunately for Fred Hoyle, he correctly knew that, hey, you can't even form a protein, let alone, I think this was just like maybe all the proteins in an amoeba. It wasn't even the amoeba itself. That's 1 in 1 followed by 40,000 zeros, basically zeros across this auditorium type of thing. So he technically correctly understood that life can't make itself. But for whatever reason, he didn't want to believe in God. And so that's another important point is we really have to know who we're talking to. Because once it'll start to dawn on you, hey, this person's, the reason they're not studying the Bible, maybe they might start out claiming, it goes against science or they want to be scientific. It becomes pretty clear fairly quickly that's not really what they're hung up on. And so that's why we need to know the person well enough to say, okay, what is the real issue they have with Christianity or the Bible? And all kinds of things. It can be just a bad experience they had with someone that they thought was a Christian or bad experience with certain denominations. But at some point you would realize that it didn't have to do with the technical. And so I have no idea what Fred Hoyle's issue with the Bible was, but the point was he knows life can't make itself. He doesn't want to acknowledge God. And so he came up, and Francis Crick pushed this for quite a while also, this idea of directed panspermia. Okay, so directed panspermia, another point, that's pretty technical, right? Directed panspermia sounds pretty technical. And so if something sounds technical, it has to be correct, right? No? I mean, it's a very technical sounding name, but you say, okay, you have to say, okay, what is directed panspermia? Well, directed panspermia was the idea that life can't make itself, technically correct. Don't want to believe in God, so aliens must have put us here. Okay, so, and that's still out there. You hear all this thing about, well, maybe aliens put life on Earth, or maybe aliens see life on Earth. Okay, really, really smart person. So then he obviously thought of the question, where'd the aliens come from? right? And so, you could say, well, maybe some really smart aliens made the aliens that put us here, right? Okay, so that's done. So okay, then, where the really smart aliens come from? Well, you had the really, really, really smart aliens. And so the whole point is he didn't answer this fundamental question. So it was like he was so committed to not believing in God, but he knew life couldn't make itself, that he and others resorted to this idea of just trying to fuzz the issue. I think a lot of you have probably seen the Star Wars movies. A long time ago in the galaxy far, far away with the letters going up the screen. Well, I always thought that was a great opening because it's basically telling you, hey, don't think about this too hard. Just enjoy the movie. So because a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, anything can happen, right? And so maybe that's where the aliens, so anyway, but it was kind of interesting. You had a similar quote from Carl Sagan. He was also a very famous evolutionist. What Sagan said, this was in a book. It was an interview that he did for MIT, and it's in the transcript of the interview, and it says, well, it is clear that one could randomly assemble all the elementary particles in the universe 1 billion times a second for the age of the universe and never get this protein. Okay, and so he was commenting, he'd calculated just a random formation of a single protein at 1 and 1 followed by 130 zeros. Okay, he's a really staunch evolutionist. So literally, I think there was a paragraph of just maybe different topic. And then he came back to it. It's the same page of the book. So you go to page 46 of this book, Communication with Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Says, there is no doubt about the fact of evolution, but there are still sizable questions on the mechanics of the evolutionary process. So it's kind of interesting. He just basically said you can't make a protein randomly, but then he's so committed, he says there's no doubt about the fact of evolution. And so what he was counting on, well, I don't know what, it's just this very contradictory statement, but obviously he's even saying that, boy, if I just look at the science, it goes against this whole idea. And so again, you have, again, just why is this person so committed to denying God? And that's what, again, it's important to talk. Now, there's some excellent technically detailed resources available. This one's back on the back table, and if that'll be here at the church building, but also, let me know if you'd like a copy, and I can at least show you how to order it, or we can get some here. But it's Stairway to Life. It's written by 2 PhDs in very relevant fields, and it's very objective. You wouldn't necessarily, pretty sure they're Christians, but it's not really clear because they just focus on the technical details, and they just go through, and so it's extremely well referenced. Every now and then, someone, if they're trying to deflect the subject, we're sitting there trying to reason together, get them to use common sense. Well, if someone gets nervous, a lot of times they'll say, well, has that been peer reviewed, or has that been, and you'll think, no, I'm wanting you to think about it, not, but these have all been peer reviewed. I mean, so these many peer reviewed references in the books, a lot of the quotes, directly from the secular literature, and so this is one good book. We'll talk about another one a little bit later on, but it's and it just shows, even just basically breaks down the what it would take to try to make even just a simple bacteria, and just shows I think breaks it into 12 steps. Shows any of those 12 steps would be impossible to happen randomly. It also does spend very politely and professionally. There was a group that was claiming they'd made life on their computer, or they'd done this or that. That was a few years ago, and so they just said, okay, what did they actually do? Well, what they'd done is they'd basically found a bacteria, and they were able to sequence its DNA, and then synthetically basically copy the DNA. In other words, so they were producing it, they were copying the DNA, but they were doing it synthetically. So really, really impressive. I mean, they spent millions of dollars, many, many years, really smart people working it again. And so they were able to do that, and they made a few changes to the DNA. But nothing at all compared to life making itself. I mean, again, just even that, if is anything going to happen randomly that you had to spend millions of dollars on just to basically just copy what was already there? They couldn't even do it from scratch. And so anyway, it has a whole chapter on that. So it's a good resource if anyone's interested in this particular topic. Okay, and then these are just the the different processes or different things that would have to happen that it goes through in the book. Okay, so now the question is, okay, so we know we can make a choice. Appreciate everybody choosing to be here tonight. And so that proves we have free will, which proves we have a soul, that proves God. That's one proof. And now the second one, there is the law of biogenesis. I mean, so in other words, it's kind of called a law that life doesn't just make itself. And you'll hear people say, well, we know it had to happen just once. Again, that's not a scientific statement. That's a religious statement. What they're saying to is, well, it had to make itself on Earth because how else could life have gotten here? But if you really just look at the science, and as our science is advancing, we've gone all the way from Ernst Haeckel claiming that he'd found some really simple life to, we know life is just more complicated than anything we can imagine. And so that's two reasons, at least, that, again, true science is the first Christian's friend. Now, a third reason is this idea about all the information in the genome. Because if we think about it, again, talked about how God uses DNA to code for the physical characteristics in life. Bacteria is really, really complex, like we've been talking about. It has a lot of genetic information, a lot of information in its DNA to, basically, create your code for the physical characteristics of the bacteria. But bacteria is nothing compared to an earthworm, which is nothing compared to a mouse, which is, and then compared to a human. So one way to think about that is, where did all that information come from? And so maybe a way to think about it is, with biblical creation, we're saying, well, Genesis 1, God created all life. He put that genetic information in the original life. So that's where the genetic information came from. It's like having an encyclopedia and maybe being asked to write a sentence about butterflies. Well, if you have a whole encyclopedia, all this information, well, you just select a little sentence about butterflies. And you probably have, 10, 20 pages on butterflies. I mean, so you just selected a small amount of that information. All that information was there for you. You just selected that little bit. What evolution would require is basically saying, okay, if I have a sentence about butterflies, and that's all I have, say you give a 6-year-old a sentence about butterflies, and even 6-year-olds know a lot, but just only information you have is a sentence about butterflies, go ahead and write the entire encyclopedia. Okay, so the question is, well, where's the information going to come from? Where do you get the information? And so that's the difference. Biblical creation, very clear. God created, all that, put all the information in the original created life. Atheistic evolution, it's like, not only do we know life can't make itself, but then even if that life somehow did make itself, well, then where does it get all the rest of the information? And so just a couple important points here. Again, true science is showing the opposite of evolution is occurring. Information is being lost from the genome, not gained. Okay, so that's kind of key because evolution would require an unimaginably large addition of genetic information to turn a simple life form into all the diverse life we see today. But the mechanism that they propose, which is natural selection acting on mutations, turns out that's either information neutral or it actually results in a loss of information. Okay, so I'm using this term, but that's really the key, because someone might say, well, these beetles on these islands that are windy, well, they evolved the ability to not fly, because if the beetle flew, it gets blown out into the ocean, dies. The beetles that don't fly, they don't. Okay, but it always, I think the first time I was exposed to this, I was still in evolution, so I was like 8 years old. I think it was at Mammoth Cave up in Kentucky. It said something about how the fish evolved the ability not to have eyes, because the cave fish, don't have eyes. But you start thinking about that. Well, that's why I say information, because the beetles losing the information required to have wings, loss of information, opposite of evolution, it actually gives them a survival advantage on a windy island. The fish in the cave, having, say, a scale where its eye should be, it can actually give it a survival advantage in a cave, right? If it gets in a fight with another cave fish, if it runs into the cave pond wall. But it's a loss of information. And so the key is, where did the information come from? And what you'll see is all these examples are just examples of natural selection. But if you look at what's happening with the information, they're either information neutral or they're actually showing the opposite of evolution. Okay, so I'm going to give just a couple examples of that. First, you had peppered moths. Now, these were actually in all the textbooks until about 2003 in the U.S. So I'll go ahead and give through this as an example from one of the textbooks that were used here. But now it's kind of, a lot of them have, some still have peppered moths, a lot of them talk darns, finches, but it's really the same thing. With the peppered moths, you had the genetic information for different coloration on the moths, always there. And it turns out it was there, but sometimes it gets activated. I mean, the more we study about DNA, just the more incredibly complicated DNA is. And then the Darwin's finch is the same thing, the information for the different beak sizes, which is what they typically point to on the Darwin's finches, that was always there, beak shapes and sizes. So, but I'll go through this, and so you'll see the analogy. So the way the story goes, and again, I'm just taking this straight from textbooks, says until 1850s, dark gray peppered moths were rare. Almost all peppered moths were pale. Okay, and the reason given was the bark on the trees that the moths rested on looked a lot like that moth on the left. Okay, and let me get you so you can see the moths. I'm sorry. And so it looked a lot like that moth that was on the left. And so the idea was those moths were camouflaged. In other words, they're sitting on the tree bark. The tree bark looks a lot like the moth on the left. So birds flying along, not going to see the moth. But some of the moths, they'd have this black coloration. They were the carbonariiform. Well, if that moth is sitting on tree bark that looks, kind of like the, just kind of light with a little bit of dark mottling in it, well, birds going to learn to pick those out in a hurry. And so basically almost all the moths were this typica-form on the left. Very few were the carbonariiform. So then goes along, says, well, during the Industrial Revolution, you get all this soot put in the air, and it kills the lichen on the bark. It starts, maybe darkening the tree bark for other reasons. And so once that tree bark gets dark, well, the population density flipped. And it kind of makes sense, or at least it was said to make sense, because, hey, now those black moths, they're the ones that blend in. So they're camouflaged. Bird can't see them. But boy, that one on the left, the typica-form, it's got this light coloration. The birds are going to pick that out. And so population density flip. You get air pollution standards, smoke, air gets cleaned up, bark goes back to normal, population density flips back again. Okay, so that's evolution in action, right? I mean, what more proof do we need for evolution? And that's kind of unfortunate. That's basically what a lot of the textbooks would say. Well, you see how that has absolutely nothing to do with evolution. Because all you're doing is just natural selection is changing the population density, but you're not creating any new genetic information. The genetic information for the typica-form was there. The genetic information for the carbonariiform was there. And just depending on the selection pressure, you're just changing that population density. So this was, sort of used as a flagship, at least, these were high school biology textbooks. It has absolutely nothing to do with evolution. And it turns out, if you look in biology textbooks, you go on the internet, all the examples for evolution that are given, they either have nothing to do with evolution, or they often show the opposite of evolution. And so keep going to a second example. This would be, you talk about bacteria developing resistance to antibiotics. And it's actually important. People are willing to objectively study this because it's really important, because this is a huge problem. Bacteria are developing resistance to antibiotics. And so there's three ways that we know that this is happening. One is the information to resist the antibiotic. It's already in the bacterial population. So say I get an infection, I take an antibiotic, it kills 999 out of 1,000 of the bacteria that are infecting me. Hey, that's a good antibiotic. But say the one remaining bacteria that could resist that antibiotic, say it recolonizes my body. Okay, well now all of a sudden I'm infected with an antibiotic-resistant strain of bacteria. Okay, and that's the problem. That's what we're trying to avoid. But was that evolution? No, because the information to resist the antibiotic was always in the genome. There's no new information being created. Now the example I just gave, that's a big change in the population density, but that information was still there. A second one referred to plasmid transfer, but it's basically just bacteria are so small that bacteria in close proximity, they can actually exchange loops of DNA. And so you have say a harmless bacteria that can resist an antibiotic, and actually we like harmless bacteria to resist antibiotics, because we say harmless bacteria, actually a lot of bacteria are good for us. But say it can resist an antibiotic and it transfers the portion of the DNA that allows it to resist the antibiotic to harmful bacteria. Okay, so now I have a harmful bacteria that can resist the antibiotic, but again, the information was always in the genome. It's not evolution. It's not creating the information that you need to turn this bacteria into a human. Third way is actually the opposite of evolution. And so what happens here is basically a lot of our modern antibiotics, we design the antibiotic so it basically looks like a nutrient. I mean, it appears as a nutrient to bacteria, so the bacteria pulls in the antibiotic just like it would any other nutrient, but then the antibiotic kills the bacteria. Okay, so it's very well designed, very clever, very advanced to try to get to kill those bacteria. Well, the bacteria can have a information losing mutation. In other words, it's the opposite of evolution. It can lose information, and in the process of losing that information, it can lose the ability to ingest that nutrient. Okay, so you think of it in a normal environment, it's a weaker bacteria now, right? It's not. I'm not focusing on weaker versus stronger, but just making the observation. If it can't ingest this nutrient that the other bacteria can, it's actually weaker, but it's mainly just lost the information needed to ingest that nutrient. But in an environment where it's being treated by antibiotics, it's the one that's going to survive, right? Because the other bacteria are going to pull in the antibiotic's going to kill them, they go away. That bacteria is going to be able to resist the antibiotic. It's not a new, it's somehow stronger, it's resisting the antibiotic. No, it just doesn't see the antibiotic because it no longer has the capability to ingest the antibiotic. So it's a loss of genetic information, the opposite of evolution. It's going the wrong way. But it can confer an antibiotic resistance. And so 3 ways bacteria develop antibiotic resistance. 2 are information neutral. 1 is the opposite of evolution. Now this is important. I didn't mention it when we were on the first slide, but a lot of textbooks, they'll use terms like microevolution. And they'll say, well, microevolution, those are the small changes we see today. And macroevolution is what happens over millions or billions of years. Okay, but it's really a sleight of hand, because microevolution, again, is neutral or losing information. Macroevolution requires you to gain information. And so the reason I say it's a sleight of hand and possibly deliberately misleading is if you're only neutral or losing information, you're never going to gain information. You're not going to, in other words, you don't increase information. If anyone here ever been to an investment seminar? An investment seminar is basically, if I'm up here and I'm talking, I'm trying to get you to give me all your money, okay? So I'm saying, I've got this great idea, we're all going to be rich, and here's the idea. Okay, so if this was an investment seminar, and I said, okay, here's the plan. We're going to sell machines, and every time we sell a machine, we're going to lose $1, but don't worry, we're going to make it up in volume. Okay, do you give me all your money? I hope not. Good. Okay, so you're still awake because everybody said no way. Okay, but that's basically what it's saying. If every time, if this mutation is in natural selection is causing a loss of genetic information, and again, that's well documented on the genome as a whole, then how's that ever going to create information? I mean, how are you going to get this bacteria turning into a person? And so, of course, you can't. And then the final one I'll give, and the only reason I mentioned this one, because this is a very obvious one, but it's actually in some of the teacher's editions where they'll say, well, if you have this student that's, you're having trouble convincing them that evolution could work, send them down to the pet store. Okay, now here's the quote that they give. They say, tell them evolution is change. Okay, well, no, it's not change. If you define evolution as change, but that's what they want to do. They say, tell them evolution is change, and ask them if they see any change. Do you see a new breed of dog or cat? Because a lot of times the way it's presented, and they act like, oh, we're just trying to simplify, but no, it's very misleading. Evolution is just change, and hey, we all see life changing, so that's how we know evolution's true. No, evolution is you have to somehow create the genetic information needed to turn a bacteria into a human. That's kind of evolution. I mean, you can define evolution any way you want to. I mean, a lot of times at work they'll say, well, the design sure has evolved over the past year. And that's true, but it's not because we set it on the shelf and let it mutate. It's because everybody's thinking about the design. So it's a lot of, but anyway, so ways you can, but the evolution we're talking about now is this idea that maybe somehow mutations in natural selection can turn a bacteria into a human. And that's what, and so very misleading to say it's just change. But if you look at new breeds in dogs and cats, well, the way they're developed is actually very strongly the opposite of evolution. I think poodles have something like 46 genetic defects. And the reason they do is when poodles are bred, basically were bred, you start out with two, I'll call them just very genetically diverse dogs, right? And then the way to breed any kind of dog, don't want to pick on poodles, but breed any kind of dog is you get rid of the genetic information you don't want. So if you want a small dog with short, curly hair, well, you got to get rid of all the genes to make the dog large, all the genes that make the fur stay straight and thick, and so you're getting rid of all that genetic information just by selective breeding. At least historically, it's been kind of just selective breeding, sort of random. Get some that's very purebred, but the problem is when you get rid of that, you get rid of other DNA that's actually needed. And so that's why I think even German Shepherds are considered really strong dogs. I think they get hip dysplasia, and a lot of you guys know a lot more about dogs. But again, that's just they in the process of breeding them, they've lost some genetic information. In other words, some very vital genetic information was bred out. They had a wheat blight in Africa that was caused by doing selective breeding to make the husk on the wheat kernel. So I guess a wheat kernel actually has a little husk on it. Trying to make that thinner so you could process it into bread easier. Okay, so hey, that's a good thing. You're trying to make more food for people. You're trying to make bread more affordable. Problem is when they were doing that, it also lost the ability to resist a certain type of wheat blight. So they had a wheat blight in Africa. It might still be going on a little bit, but it caused a huge portion of the wheat crop to be lost. And so again, this selective breeding, be it new breeds of dogs and cats, it's very strongly the opposite of evolution. And so you can't make the claim that a change is somehow evidence for evolution, because again, it doesn't, and here's my poodle picture, but anyway, it doesn't, it has to be a lot more than change. It can't just be, it has to be somehow an addition of evolution. So again, you start out with a certain type of dog. You can breed any kind of dog. Genetic diversity, 2 dogs that came off the ark. You could breed any kind of dog you wanted to, but in the process of doing that with selective breeding, you're going to be losing some genetic information, and then that genetic information can have, can lead to other issues. So give a final example on this. And so this is just one more analogy. We talked about money. Usually, I haven't ever had any speaker training, but I'm guessing if you talk about cars or money, people get interested. Okay, so so we did the money one, so now we'll do cars. Okay, so this would be an idea of genomic selection. So what you do is everybody imagine the perfect automobile, and since you have the perfect automobile, you want to make the perfect manual, right? You want to be able to make your automobile. So you got the perfect automobile in mind. You make the perfect manual for it. Make 1,000 copies of your manual. Okay, so you got 1,000 copies of your manual written. But before you make a single car, I want you to change 100 words in each manual. Okay, so you have 1,000 manuals. Each one has 100 words changed in it, and they're random. Different words in each manual. You just have to make them random. Go ahead and make 1,500 cars, okay, from those 1,000 manuals. Okay, are those cars going to be perfect? No, because every one of them, the manual had 100 words changed. Okay, so that's your mutations, right? And it turns out there's like 100 to 1,000 mutations per generation. And so this is pretty reasonable numbers, or just the numbers are right. It's obviously a whole different example. Okay, so, but the good news is you made 1,500 cars. So some of them, they're all not perfect, but some of them you could probably live with, right? Like say you wanted a rear, sporty car, rear view mirror about this big. Say the rear view mirror is like this big, okay? Where you're like, okay, I can live with that, maybe, because maybe another one of your cars has the engine up on the roof, right, or something like that. So it doesn't even run. So you get rid of the cars that you just can't deal with. You keep the ones that have what you consider the least imperfections, or the ones that are still the best. So you're down to your 1,000 cars. Now you take the manuals that you used to make those 1,000 cars. Okay, so these are the ones you kept. These were the keepers, and change another 100 words in each of those manuals. Okay, so you change 100 words in each of those manuals. Now every manual's had 200 words made. You make your 1,500 cars. You get rid of the ones the worst. You keep the 1,000 best. Natural selection mutations. Do it again. Now you've changed 300 words in each manual. Do that 100 times. Every manual will have had 10,000 words changed in it. Okay, so the question, because again, this is a very good analog to mutations and natural selection. So the question is, how long does it take your car to turn into a jet airplane? Yeah, it's not going that direction, right? What you're really going to get is error catastrophe. Eventually, there'll be no manual left that can still make a car that operates. And so so another way to think about that, if you get enough mutations in a species or a type of animal, eventually, they'll go extinct. And that's why I know a lot of you worked in the chemical industry. A lot of you work around radiation. That's why mutagens are so tightly regulated, because we know that mutations, even with natural selection, they're not a good thing, because you're taking something highly designed, such as our DNA, and you're just randomly changing it. And you can have all the natural selection you want. It's not going to cause things to. You're not going to add information. You're not going to cause things to get better. Okay, so now I'm going to really quickly talk about the fossil record. Because I think there's another session starting here at 10 in the morning. So no, we won't go that late. So anyway, the fossil record, you have two views of the fossil record. You have atheistic evolution and biblical creation. So again, just looking at the literatures out there, with atheistic evolution, they basically say fossils are formed over hundreds of millions of years. Okay, so you look at this fossil record and they're saying, down here to up here, hundreds of millions of years. Some cases they'll say, billion years. But in that order. And they'll say the order of burial is related to time. So older fossils buried deeper. They pretty readily acknowledge now you don't see transitional forms in the fossil record. The fossil shows up and it's perfectly formed. I mean, it's the animal and stays the same through the whole fossil record and then disappears. And so usually the lack of transitional forms is explained by imperfections in the fossil record. And there is also basically the idea of punctuated equilibrium. That's kind of, I think, falling out of favor, although I think it's Stephen Jay Gould, real famous evolutionist, pushed it pretty hard. The idea was, okay, the reason we don't see transitional forms is that the transitions happen so fast that you don't have time to find a fossil on it. But I think that one's fallen out of favor even with the within the evolutionist community. The other option you have is biblical creation. And so biblical creation, basically most of the models would say, well, the fossils formed primarily during the flood. The order of burial is related to the order the habitats were destroyed. And so in other words, during the flood, you have habitats that are being destroyed, and it's a very violent event. If you read in Genesis, the flood it's not just a gentle rainstorm. Really, you have the fountains of the great deep where probably most of the water actually came from, but a very violent event. You'd have tidal waves, say from the fountains of the great deep. You have all these things happening. But basically, it's the order of burial, now that can relate to when the habitats are destroyed, but also relates to the ability of an animal to flee rising floodwaters, other factors that affect. Transitional forms never existed, that's why we don't find them. And the quality of fossils, of course, indicates rapid burial and fossilization. And so, because again, you find fossils, you look at those fossils in the upper left, and you can see like gill structure on some fossils. I mean, it's so like a fossilized fish, or very fine detail. So you know that fossil had to be formed very quickly before any of that detail had time to decay away. And so that's the kind of, I guess you'd say, the biblical model. Another one, the model also more detail. I have one of the DVDs back there is Genesis History, also exceptionally well done. But it talks about how a lot of times we'll find tracks of animals way below where we find the bones of the same animal. I mean, way below in a fossil record. Well, that kind of makes sense if they're fleeing rising floodwaters, because they're leaving footprints, before they're actually getting buried in the flood. And so again, explains a lot of things. Good explanatory capability with the flood model. And so those are, again, I'd say just the two basic models. Now, I do want to add a couple of quotes. Transitional form. Again, this is a quote from one of the textbooks. Says, transitional forms represent the process of one type of animal transitioning into another type. Biblical creation, a transitional form, is really just variation within a kind. And so this is an oversimplified example, but say dogs no longer existed, and we just found bones. Well, say you found the bones of a Yorkie, a Beagle, and a German Shepherd. Well, you'd have two ways of looking at that. You could say, well, hey, those are all dogs. Boy, dogs had a lot of diversity, all kinds of different dogs. So that'd be one way to look at it. So it'd just be basically a variation within a kind. Somehow the two dogs that came off the ark, they led to these types of dogs, or all of this potential variety. But the other way to look at that would be, well, maybe that shows that Yorkies transitioned into Beagles, which transitioned into German Shepherds. Or Yorkie evolved into a Beagle, which evolved into a German Shepherd. And, those are, they're two ideas. And of course, we have the advantage now, we know what really happened, but that's generally when we see fossils, it's kind of the same thing. You can say, maybe this was a transitional form or that was a transitional form. in all cases, and everybody will say, well, what if we find something in the future? But there's enough cases to date. You'll find out that it was either a whole new species that's extinct, or a whole new kind of animal that's extinct that we no longer see today, or it's just a variation within a kind, just variability within a species. And that's even happening with like human and ape skulls. Even as recently as 20 years ago, they used to try to line the skulls up and say, oh, here's this ape, and it shows it turning into a human. But now they've, even at the National Museum of Natural History, the Smithsonian up in D.C., they've now started showing, no, these are apes and these are humans. And so those skulls are not necessarily trying to blend them together. That's just, these are ape skulls, these are human skulls. And so it's, so again, true science is advancing. And so that's, just important observation, I guess you'd say. So the other point that we have to keep in mind is, fossils, if you find a bone chip or you just find a little bit of evidence, well, it's unfortunately, very easy for that to be spun in any way desired. And so a lot of times there's a lot of pressure or to kind of conform to the current thinking. But this is a quote. This is Dr. David Pilbeam. And again, I'll just say he's a scientist speaking as a scientist. But he's a PhD at Yale University. He was a professor of social sciences at Harvard University, curator of paleontology at the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology. So again, well-credentialed scientist. He says, I'm also aware of the fact that, at least in my own subject of paleoanthropology, theory heavily influenced by implicit ideas almost always dominates data. Ideas that are totally unrelated to actual fossils have dominated theory building, which in turn strongly influence the way fossils are interpreted. So what he's saying is, you go out and you find a fossil, and you have this theory. This is kind of the current accepted theory. Subconscious or conscious, there's this pressure to fit your fossil into that theory, because you don't want to be the person that says, you got to be pretty bold to say, hey, this upsets your whole theory. So it's kind of self-reinforcing. And so he's just acknowledging that. And then on the order of transitional forms, this is Dr. Colin Patterson. So he's a senior paleontologist, British Museum of Natural History. Again, very well-credentialed, but he's a scientist speaking as a scientist. And so he was writing a book, and he was asked to add some transitional forms into his book because he didn't include any. So his quote was, I fully agree with your comments on the lack of direct illustration of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. You suggested an artist should be used to visualize such transformations, but where would he get the information from? I could not honestly provide it, and if I were to leave it to artistic license, would that not mislead the reader? So that's a really good quote. Now, unfortunately, most of the textbooks now, you have to read the fine print, because they'll show this nice continuum of, this turning into that. You read the fine print, well, they found a fossil here, maybe a little bit of a fossil here and a fossil here, and the rest is just an artist's rendition of what the so-called transitional forms might have looked like. And so I'll say the good news is they have it in the fine print. The two bad news is, one, they might just start leaving out the fine print, because it's kind of trend in that direction. But the other one is, if you're a biology student, you're cramming for a test, you're not going to be reading the fine print. You're just going to be trying to learn so a lot of times the fine print probably gets overlooked. Okay, so I'm going to give some examples. This was, again, just vague information used to spin, to promote evolution. This was Archaeoraptors, 1999 to 2000, and it was presented as a proof of dinosaur to bird evolution. And so what had happened was, apparently a large sum of money was offered for anyone that could provide evidence that dinosaurs turned into birds. Okay, really large sum of money. I think some accounts says like $80,000. And so, that's poor science, because that's a huge temptation. And we'll talk about that more tomorrow too. If you can pay someone for data, because it costs, people have to take time and maybe equipment to get data, that's fine. But when you start paying someone to find a certain conclusion, that's where it's really no longer science, because you're biasing it. And so this had, what basically happened was, this was Archaeoraptor. It was displayed in National Geographic Explorers Hall, October 15th, 1999 to January 21, 2000. Viewed by 110,000 people, mostly children. It's called A Missing Link. They had a cover article, Feathers for T-Rex, the November 1999 National Geographic magazine. It's admitted to be a fraud in January 2000. Basically, the head and body of a bird had been combined with the tail of a dinosaur. And a similar fraudulent fossil was published in Nature a few months earlier. Okay, so that's So a few things there. So you got the $80,000, and someone basically, apparently they just shown up with this fossil, which was the head and body of a bird, the tail of a dinosaur. And obviously, boy, that would sure look like a transitional form, but it was displayed. And so what if you're out evangelizing, you're talking to one of those 110,000 people that were mostly children, and you get on this subject? Well, they're going to say, no, I saw it with my own eyes. I was on a field trip in D.C., really nice museum, and I saw it with my own eyes that dinosaurs turned into birds. So you could be running into that. And so keep tuned for that, because you have to know how you would address that in that situation. A lot of times it wouldn't be that clear what their hang-up was, but when you start talking about, okay, what's this person's real reason for resisting? Well, they might have just seen basically fake science or something fraudulent in the past that's really causing them to be kind of hung up on this issue. So this was, the good news was this got a lot of debate. So this is a quote from Storrs Olson. He is the curator of birds at the National Museum of Natural History at Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. He says, the idea of feathered dinosaurs and the theropod origin of birds is being actively promulgated by a cadre of zealous scientists acting in concert with certain editors at Nature and National Geographic, who themselves have become outspoken and highly biased proselytizers of the faith. Truth and careful scientific weighing of evidence have been amongst the first casualty in their program, which is now fast becoming one of the grander scientific hoaxes of our age, the paleontological equivalent of cold fusion. Okay, so that's a very critical quote. And again, he's the curator of birds at the National Museum of Natural History of the Smithsonian Institute. So again, a very credentialed scientist, but he's speaking as a scientist. But again, it got even better because it also made a lot of the, I guess you say, the popular press. This is actually USA Today. It says the missing link that wasn't, the subheading was a bird fossils hailed as a major find until red-faced scientists discover it was doctored, and it basically says what we just talked about. So again, but you think about it, if you just find a piece of a fossil, then it's very easy to spin that any way you want to. Now that was, that was a fraud. Someone had actually fabricated that particular fossil. This next one wasn't a fraud. I guess I will mention before we leave this is, from true science we know dinosaurs don't turn into birds. You can look at the bone structure, the respiratory system, just even turn in a scale into a feather. And so should say if you get in this kind of discussion, try to get the person back to talking about the true science, not just, well, we found this bone and we think this bone fit here. Because we got a lot more detail that we can apply to it here. And so, again, just from true science, scales are folds of skin, feathers are complex structures of the barbed and hooks. Feathers originate from follicles inside the skin, totally different from scales. Feathers require significant new and different genetic information. No source of this new information. Feathered proteins are even biochemically different than scale proteins. So, just get back to the true science. This is true operational science. I can study this in a lab. And so it's not just trying to look at a bone or something and decide, well, maybe that was somehow a dinosaur turning into a bird or trying to. Okay, so but the other one, now this wasn't a fraud. It was a tooth that was found in February of 1922, and it was declared human by Dr. Henry F. Osborne of the American Museum of Natural History in New York. Okay, and tooth is called Nebraska Man. And once it was declared human, well, it started making all kinds of press. And so this was the cover story of the Illustrated London News of June 24th, 1922. And just want to show you some of the detail here. So you had a tooth, right? Okay. So from the tooth, we know what Nebraska Man looks like. That's pretty impressive from a tooth. I think if you take one of my teeth, they'd probably just say, I don't know what they'd say, but it probably wouldn't be, it's like, but anyway, so we know what Nebraska Man looks like from a tooth. We know what kind of weapon he used. You see the club in his left hand, right? Okay, this is from a tooth. We know what kind of livestock he kept. See the camels in the background, right? Okay, so this is impressive. I mean, the amount of detail you can get from a tooth. You never thought of this, but most impressive at all, and you guys have probably noticed this by now, we know what his wife looked like. Okay, so that's from a tooth. Now, what happened was, this was, unfortunately, you think, well, 1922 to 1927, why does that matter? Well, the Scopes trial was in 1925, and that was really when the U.S. was deciding, do we teach evolution or not? I mean, it wasn't titled that, it was, but that's effectively what was trying to be set, was people trying to drive the U.S. to teach evolution. So that evidence was still out there in 1925. And of course, it was totally wrong. It wasn't a deliberate fraud, but in 1927, another tooth was found, but with that tooth, there were bones, and we figured out that Nebraska man was just an extinct wild pig. And it was only extinct in the U.S. It turns out, I think those pigs still live in South America, okay? But you think about the impact that these kind of pictures have, this thinking for 5 years, the indoctrinating the public. But in 1927, all the damage had been done, and people are actually really fascinated with cavemen. You know, I mean, here they're carrying clubs. They're, you can make great movies about them. You go back in that era, or cartoons. It's all about cavemen, or a lot of them are about cavemen. So, but again, it was just an extinct wild pig. And so, true science is the Christian's friend. True science advanced. So we went from just having a tooth to having a tooth with bones, advancement in true science, which again showed that this wasn't evolution. It was just an extinct wild pig. But the damage that was done in the time it took true science to advance was actually significant. Okay, so claims that ape-like creatures turn into humans, they still continue today. Now they're getting less and less, and that's good. I think it's still going to be in the textbooks and on the internet for a long time. But this was from about 20 years ago, and I'll just read these quotes. It says, the usual artistic license in reconstructing the fleshly features of ape men from bones allows evolutionary bias enormous free reign. So in other words, they're saying is, all you have is the bones at best. And so you can kind of put the bones the way you want them. But then you add all the, what color was the skin? Did they have hair? What length was the hair? All these different things. That's kind of up to artistic license. I mean, again, a good artist, a good scientist will give their best guess, but it's still artistic license. But the quote goes on, says, this statue's, it says, however, artists do not usually misrepresent the bones. This statue's feet and hands are simply wrong and mislead the public. Minton, that's Dr. David Minton, then Associate Professor of Anatomy and Neurobiology at Washington University, cites evolutionary sources. So again, he's citing referenced evolutionary sources, because so it's and he has those references, show that creatures in the species had hands and feet which were not at all like human hands and feet. Rather, they have long, curved fingers and toes, even more so than apes today that live mostly in trees. And so what some people thought was happening is, you go down to like a children's clothing store, and you have a mannequin of a child, wearing clothes. They're trying to get you to buy the clothes. Well, if you just took the head of the child off, stuck the head of a monkey on, and then added some hair to that mannequin, that's a cheap way to make an exhibit. Totally wrong. But that's a cheap way to make something looks like a small creature turning into a human, because it still had the ape's head, and it had the hairy feet and stuff. Not sure that's going on, but that's just one of the people that noted that that's kind of what it looked like. Goes on. Canadian school teacher David Buckner has weighed in on the debate by posting an internet challenge to this misleading statue. He says that if people visiting this exhibition were to see an accurate replica of Lucy in the trees with features typical of tree-dwelling primates, it would make them question the whole notion of human evolution. Lucy would be seen as just some sort of extinct ape. Bruce Carr, the zoo's director of education, has no plans to alter the exhibit. We cannot be updating every exhibit based on every new piece of evidence, he says. What we look at is the overall exhibit and the impression it creates. We think that the overall impression this exhibit creates is correct. Okay, so what's the overall impression that that exhibit is trying to present? Well, obviously the idea of evolution, obviously the idea that apes turn into humans. What's being presented, he wasn't really disagreeing that it's wrong. And so again, it's a religious thing. It's not a scientific thing. Scientific, you'd say, we got to get this fixed fast. We got to get the real evidence out there in front of the people. Religious is just like, go whatever direction you want to with it. And so that's again, kind of telling quote. And then that goes on, and that's by the way in the upper right. That's what Lucy would look like, which is kind of a straightforward interpretation of the bones. Straightforward, how the bones would fit together in a fossil, which is a really, really fascinating ape. But that's obviously not going to convince anybody that apes were turning into humans. Just wow, there were some really fascinating extinct apes. Dr. Minton points out that if Lucy's feet were accurately shown, it would be obvious they could never fit into the famous Laetoli fossil footprints. These are Exhibit A for evolutionary belief in upright walking by Lucy's kind, whereas in fact they are identical to barefoot humans. Professor Betsy Schumann, she's actually at his same university, evolution expert at Minton's University, admits the statue's feet probably are not accurate, but when asked whether the statue should be changed, she says, absolutely not. Again, why not? And then again, it's just, don't want to speculate, but an obvious why not would just be, hey, this exhibit is designed to promote evolution, so why would we change it in a way that would keep it from promoting evolution? Okay, so I'll fast forward. These were taken about 5 years ago, maybe a little bit less. So this is up at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. So again, I'll just say some progress. It's not, they're still pushing evolution, but they're making progress. And so this is a picture of what they show, and this was the placard next. It says, "The brown bones are casts of the parts of Lucy's skeleton that were excavated. The black bones represent missing parts. They were filled in using mirror images of bones that were found, fossils from other individuals of Lucy's species, and knowledge of human anatomy." Okay, and in other documents, they note that the hip bones were also deliberately altered to appear more human. But why would you alter the hip bones to appear more human? Well, I think that last quote is key. It says, and this is right on their display sign, it says, "knowledge of human anatomy." Okay, why didn't they use knowledge of ape anatomy? Well, the reason is, again, you're assuming that this creature was trying to turn into a human. And again, it's just a silly example could be, say you're, trying to reconstruct the fossil of a chicken using your knowledge of pig anatomy. Okay, you can come up with something that looks really strange. And so again, there's this bias, just this interpretation. Well, we know, we think that this should be something that's trying to turn into a human. And so again, just the knowledge of human anatomy was kind of a tacit admission. But this one, again, was actually impressive because this is at least one of the more public times that this was finally admitted. It says, "Lucy's species had compact feet that supported the body's weight during upright walking. But look at the toe bones. They are longer and more curved than those of a modern human foot, more like those of tree-climbing apes." Okay, so that's a huge step to get to, that creature, that representation with the, longer and more curved than those of a modern human foot, more like those of tree-climbing apes. Compare that foot, which they're readily acknowledging, to what we were talking about a minute ago, where the foot is, again, it's essentially just a human foot that someone stuck hair on. So you can say, okay, so that's progress, and it was. Want to give credit where credit's due, but then it gets worse again. So this is they're spotlighting the foot, which is great, but you notice the facial expression. Remember the artistic license, and that facial expression to me looked human. And someone that's good at art probably knows many more reasons than what were pointed out to me. But one of the things they said is, in apes you don't see the whites of their eyes. Humans you do. Okay. So you look at that, not only do you see the whites of the eyes, the direction of the eyes is such that you really see the whites of the eyes. Okay? And so again, it's the idea that, okay, we're acknowledging it's got, curved fingers, curved toes, not too human, but you can make the face look human if you want to. And so that's what they did. Okay, so that was the next one, and then it just starts getting really over the top. This was the next one, okay, and I'm just going down the exhibits. So, of course, you have the chimp and the human. They're just both in deep thought. They even have the same hand position on their chin or nose or whatever when they're thinking. Okay, so that's kind of blatant. And then that bottom one, and I need to try to get a picture without as much glare. But you notice if you can see the creature in the front of that, the bottom, it's literally, if you see it in person, it's like, hey, you watching the football game tonight? You want to come over for pizza? It's just this very, and the feet are completely wrong again. The feet are back to being human feet. Walking completely upright. The whole, so just everything. So that was kind of how that particular exhibit ended. And so again, it's in some ways getting better, but it's still something that you're just going to have to be able to talk to people about. Now, the good news is in 2018, we did actually finally had enough money, we're good enough at sequencing DNA that we actually were able to, or very skilled scientists, were able to compile a chimpanzee genome de novo assembly, meaning you actually just measured it, you looked at the whole thing. And so they started looking at things. As noted by Richard Buggs, University of London evolutionary geneticist, the percentage of nucleotides in the human genome that had one-to-one exact matches in the chimpanzee genome was 84.38%. Okay, so anybody ever heard a different number between the similarity between human DNA and chimp DNA? I mean, there's numbers out there that go 98, 99%. And so he's just pointing out, if you just look at the, you just look at the DNA, that's the one-to-one match. And there's one of the DVDs back there is really good. It's, again, a PhD geneticist talking about, are humans and chimps related, which they're not. God created us both, but the key difference is people are created in God's image, and chimps aren't. Ape-like creatures weren't. But anyway, so that was, so they actually say shouldn't focus on that because, DNA is just the physical structure, and even if it was only 1 or 2% difference, that's a huge difference. But, I mean, that's the number. If you really just go one to one, that number keeps going down. I mean, now there's sources saying it's less than 80%. Okay, then they had a big problem was that chimps have 24 chromosome pairs. People only have 23. So how could we both have descended from the same ape-like creature? And so they started alleging this idea of what they called chromosome 2 fusion. And they tried to say that one of the chromosomes must have fused together. One of the chimp chromosomes must have fused together, so now that we'd all have, that's how humans have 23 now, after we'd split off from our common ape-like ancestor. And so that's one of the ones you got on the internet. There's all kinds of, videos made 2005, 2010, trying to claim there's proof of this. Well, once they really did this detailed look at the DNA, that went away also. And so this is, I'll go quickly, but this is, there's a good book back there that gives all the details, and again, a really good DVD. But we know now that chromosome 2 fusion, the true science is saying that never happened. There's no satellite DNA at the alleged fusion site. So we have documented cases of fusions. I had 798 DNA letters, which is very explainable, very common. If it was actually a fusion site, you expect 10,000 to 30,000. Okay, so that's very, so again, true science going against this idea. The alleged fusion site located inside a gene is DDX11L2 gene is expressed in at least 255 cell and tissue types. Alleged fusion site is itself functional and serves an important engineered purpose. The site acts as a switch for controlling gene activity. And so when people used to talk about junk DNA, they consider the switches as junk, or they consider anything that showed how things went together as junk. I give an analogy would be, because they used to say, now there's a good agreement now that all of the DNA, all of our genetics are important. But for about 5 years, there was this whole thing about junk DNA being pushed, and now we figured out there's no such thing as junk. The idea of junk DNA would be like if you ever wanted to repair a transmission, so you get the manual for the transmission, first several pages are going to be the parts list, okay? And so that would be what they would consider the important stuff. The rest of the manual is how the parts go together, and that's what they were considering junk, okay? So, and so again, the rest of the manual is just as important as the parts list, and so that's, but anyway, so what they're saying is, hey, this is functional. And so it acts as a switch for controlling gene activity. It's expressed. So how are you going to have, if these two chromosomes somehow just randomly fuse together, you had this supposed site where they had fused, how's that functional? I mean, it was obviously designed that way from the start. Goes on, talks about the interstitial telomeres are found throughout the human genome, function-related gene expression, no viable evidence of an extra centromere region. That was another idea or something that they had to try to find, was this extra centromere. And then finally, the alleged fossil centromeres located inside a gene, both intron and exon regions, codes for amino acids and resulting genes proteins. So again, you can't have these so-called useless, undesigned things of having these very important functions. And that's what, again, we found once the true science had advanced. And then finally, the Y chromosome. Now this is kind of subtle, but it should make sense. So the Y chromosome, it mutates at a slower rate than basically than the rest of the genome, different chromosome genome. And so so if supposedly you had this human ancestor, or I'm sorry, this ape-like creature, there was an ancestor to both humans and chimps, and then somehow you split. Well, if this line, the Y chromosome, is mutating slower than this line, you'd expect there to be fewer differences within the Y chromosome than the rest of the genome. We actually see many more. And so again, it's the exact opposite that would have been predicted, but this is true observed science now that again, the science has advanced that. So lots of reasons why we know that chimps and humans did not come from the same ape-like creature. And again, it is actually subtly starting to make its way into some of the museums, which is good, but it'll be just like the Monera. It'll probably be 50 years before that idea is completely out of the museums. And so unfortunately, during that time, we have a lot of impact. This was, again, it's a weekday, I think it was a Monday. Lots of really good families in the museum here. And when I say really good families, I mean, you think about it, people are either taking time off from school, taking time off from work, the families together going through the museum, like just really eye-catching exhibits. this particular wing, and this is again the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, is just multi-$100 million wing dedicated to promoting evolution. So even though the exhibits were impressive, and if you just looked at and a lot of those are actual fossils, it would be a very, I guess you'd say, visually effective exhibit. But the problem is all the little footnotes trying to pretend, well, this maybe turn into that. It's kind of interesting. They have a screen, multi-$100 million again, and it literally just shows bubbles, and it says 3.8 billion years ago, life arose on the earth. And you're supposed to be so impressed by the big flat screen and the bubbles that you don't say, okay, you got all this money, can you tell me how that happened? Because they know it didn't happen. But anyway, but it's just, again, it can have a tremendous negative impact. And the other thing that's difficult is, the Hope Diamond's in this museum. I mean, you have all kinds of things you actually want to go see. They have some great, so I think a lot of Christians, when they go to a museum like this, just hit it head on. Just do your homework. Certainly get up to like the Creation Museum or the Ark Encounter or other places that have a lot of data, but read up on it. So still go to the museums, but go into it just saying, okay, here's why this isn't correct, but boy, cool fossil. Here's what's here. A lot of stuff is correct if it's not trying to push evolution. So again, so just a thought. So wrapping up, Genesis 1:26 or 27, as we talked about at the start of the session, we all get to choose where we put our faith. Genesis 1:26, 27 says, then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created him. And then finally, we talked about right at the start, okay, what's our goal? And the goal is to get someone to objectively consider the Bible and decide whether they want to spend eternity with God or separated from God. I mean, that's really the kind of the ultimate goal. And so every now and then, you kind of want this to happen, the person to get just frustrated enough that they'll say, well, okay, you don't believe in all this stuff that we've been talking about. What do you believe? Okay, so you absolutely never want to be caught off guard if someone says that. You want to say, well, hey, let's just say, or you don't even want to say, hey, let's talk about that tomorrow. You want to really get into it right away. And so all this slide is really just have in mind, how you would respond if someone said, well, okay, what do you believe? And so do pick Romans 1:16, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek. And so that might be a good place to start. You say, well, let's start talking about salvation, because that's what's most important. We're talking about our eternity. And so again, Romans 1:16 gets in the Bible. And then what's interesting, just reading through the book of Acts or studying the book of Acts, and I know a lot of you have been on mission trips, a lot of Bible studies, and so maybe you've noticed this too, and maybe not, let me know, but you'll notice if you just, within the book of Acts, you have the examples of people becoming Christians, the examples of people being saved. You can answer almost any question a person might have. They might say, well, you don't know what I've done. I've sinned too much. I can never be forgiven. You say, well, have you crucified the Son of God? And I'm like, well, no. And then you go back to, Acts 2, 36 through 38. These are the people that nailed Jesus to the cross. Hey, they had the chance to, they believed, and so they had the opportunity to repent and be baptized, and receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. I need to, study for a year, and then I'll get back. You get that one a lot. I want to study for the next year, then I'll get back with you and say, well, go to Acts 16, 23 through 34. You got the Philippian jailer. I mean, how long did he realistically get to study? He had the earthquake at midnight. Paul and Silas, by the way, had a really long day up to that point. You can talk about that another time. But so you had the earthquake at midnight. Chains fall off. The doors fly open. The jailer thinks they've all escaped. He's ready to kill himself. Paul tells them, don't do yourself no harm. We're all still here. Obviously that makes an impression, because usually the prisoners would be long gone. And so he asks them, what must he do to be saved? They tell him, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. They study the Bible. So that's all happening between midnight and morning, because it says that very hour of the night he was baptized. Okay, so literally within a few hours, he knew enough to know that he had to be baptized. So that's one thing. And then they say, well, when should I be baptized? Well, it's the middle of the night. I'll pick a number. Say it's 4 in the morning. The Bible just says that very hour of the night. Say it's 4 in the morning. Okay, Paul and Silas really had a really long day. It's dark. You can't really see where you're going. He says he's baptized at very hour of the night. So that means there's some urgency there. Because we would certainly have excused him if they said, wow, we're all exhausted, let's sleep and we'll get up around noon or so and go baptize you. No, it was that very hour of the night. And so actually had this happen as a Bible study down in Honduras. And the woman we were studying with, she is kind of interesting. She's really agreeable with the study. And then and finally said, well, what questions do you have that would keep you from being baptized? And she's really open. She rattled off like 5 questions in Spanish. I didn't know what she was saying. Fortunately, the interpreter was also a Christian. And she says, okay, I want to be baptized. And I don't know what the questions were. And so asked the really silly question, when? And she just looks at us like, well, now. Because I think we had just gone through Acts 16. Anyways, literally, she's hopping in the truck. We're trying to get the rest of the team together. She's already heading for a tilapia pond because she wants to be baptized. And we tell her, no, we actually have a baptistry in that church. So, examples from the Bible actually have a really big impact on people. And so that's just one idea. But there's many other ways to approach a Bible study. So anyway, I always like to just end on this slide just to get people thinking again what the real purpose is. Had a great technical conversation. You guys have been a great audience. Really look forward to seeing everybody at 10 o'clock tomorrow. But I'll turn it back over to Robert in case he has any final comments. But again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was so interesting and so helpful. I think we're better equipped now to answer some of the arguments of the atheist or the evolutionist against God as our creator and what the Bible has to say about all of those kind of things. I know I picked up some new information that I had never heard before, and you've expounded on other things that helped me to understand better. So we appreciate it so very, very much. We appreciate your faith. We appreciate your love for the Lord and reminding us tonight of our great mission as Christians to make disciples of all people. And of course, if you want to hear more about the Lord, about His church, about salvation, we'd love to visit with you about that. And I know our brother will be here, and you can talk with him if you have other questions as well. But thank you so much for bringing this to us. We appreciate the good work that you're doing in this regard. I was just amazed at so many of, when you just get to the facts, you can see it doesn't prove evolution. In fact, as you noticed many times, contradicts the idea of evolution completely. But thank you, Mike, and thank you to each one of you who have come out this evening. We do appreciate your good attention and your support of our seminar tonight. We're going to continue tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, and we'll have a couple of sessions before lunch, and then we'll have lunch at noon with a short question and answer session after lunch, and we'd love for you to come out and join us for that. And if you need a place to come and go to Bible class and worship Sunday, we'd love to invite you here. Mike will continue to be with us Sunday morning at 9 o'clock and at our worship at 10 o'clock. So again, we're so blessed to have you with us tonight. And Mike, you have blessed us in a wonderful way as well. We're going to close with a song. Harry Holbrook, one of our song leaders here at Northwest, and a closing prayer. Curtis Taft, one of our members here who is serving with the Lads to Leaders program. You might want to know some more about that. I'm sure he'd love to talk to you about that. There's Curtis right down here. But let's all stand for our closing song and our prayer.
Please turn to Song 991. This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears all nature sings, and round me ring the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world, I rest me in the thought of and trees of skies and sea, his hand the wonders wrought. This is my Father's world, the birds their carols raise, the morning light, the lily white, declare their Maker's praise. This is my Father's world, he shines in all splendor. In the rustling grass I hear him pass, he speaks to me everywhere.
Would you bow with me? Our most holy and all-wise Heavenly Father, we approach your throne of mercy at this time, thanking thee for this day. Thanking thee for this opportunity to come together, to study more about science, to understand how it relates to the creation, how it relates to your word. May we always be prepared to defend the faith in everything that we do and to become more educated in your will. Be with us through this seminar tomorrow and on Sunday. Bring us back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Keep us safe as we leave this place tonight and take us back to our home places. In Christ's name, amen.